During the reign of the Golden Order, the lands between was governed by 3 rulers: Queen Marika the Eternal, Elden Lord Radagon, and Elden Lord Godfrey. Marika hails from the lands of the Numen, and although the DLC greatly expanded upon her origins, much of her past remains a mystery, even more so for her second husband, Radagon. However, this is not the case for Godfrey, whose history seems to have been comparatively well documented in his rise to Elden Lord and subsequent exile. Although it is not made glaringly obvious, it is communicated rather concisely and directly. In fact, almost all the pieces of this puzzle can be found within Limgrave. Let's start by examining what was previously a cut armor set, the Braves set, added to the game in the DLC as the Highland Warriors set. We will explore the information given in the DLC later on. The item description has been changed in the final version of the game, and basing everything on something not present in the game isn't ideal. However, I believe it's still worth examining. The Braves Battlewear states: Battlewear fashioned from leather armor adorned with large sheets of cloth. Garb worn by warriors of the frigid uplands. The red cloth signifies participation in the Long March long ago, and this ceremonial garb beseeches the favor of the warrior king who led them. Again, this item description is not present in the final game. However, these are things that can be gleaned from other items. The most important aspect of this armor set is the Brave's leather helm. There is no new information in the item description. However, the appearance of this leather helm may seem familiar, and appears to connect to multiple items found in vanilla. One of the first enemies one is likely to encounter in their journey are the Kaiden sellswords, hulking mercenaries who are found across Limgrave and Stormhill in the south, and the consecrated snowfield in the north. When comparing the Brave's leather helm to the Kaiden helm, you may notice some glaring similarities. In particular, both helmets feature a ridge running from the top of the head down to the nose, where we find a long rectangular nose guard. The shape around the eyes is also extremely similar, with a domino mask-like appearance. In fact, were you to remove the chainmail that protects the mouth area on the Kaiden helm, it becomes clear that these 2 helmets are almost the exact same design, simply made of different materials. The Brave's leather helm reads: Battlewear wrapped in thick leather, garb worn by warriors of the frigid uplands. The Kaiden helm tells us: helm worn by Kaiden sellswords. These hulking mercenaries, said to hail from the mountain tops of the wintry north, are adept at fighting on horseback. Kaiden is the name of their home settlement. Perhaps the idea was to communicate the progression of a single culture. The ancestors wearing leather armor, while the descendants were a modern metal variation. Whatever the case may be, their similar appearance and origins lend credence to them sharing a common ancestry. The Braves from the frigid uplands, and the Kaiden from the wintry north, both potentially alluding to the forbidden lands beyond Landel, in the far north of the lands between. Interestingly, while we don't seem to discover the home settlement of Kaiden, we do find Kaiden sellswords in the wintry north, the consecrated snowfield. However, this isn't the only item that connects to the Brave's leather helm. In fact, it is depicted on another piece of equipment. The Axe Talisman depicts a bearded warrior wearing a Kaiden-style helm, featuring the same distinctive nose guard and domino mask-like shape around the eyes. The Axe Talisman reads: a talisman depicting an axe and a warrior. The lord who led the Long March bore an axe, and his loyal warriors honored him by wielding axes of their own, making them very effective at dealing decisive blows. The Axe Talisman depicts a warrior, perhaps a participant of the Long March, or maybe even its leader, Godfrey, given the pronounced beard, wearing a Kaiden-style helm. The Long March being the event that precipitated Godfrey and the Tarnished departing from the lands between. This information is further developed by both the Axe of Godfrey and the remembrance of Hoaralou, which state respectively: Weapon of Godfrey, Elden Lord. It was broken in a battle fought as leader of the Tarnished during the Long March. This weapon is symbolic of Godfrey's vow to conduct himself as a lord, later becoming an emblem of the Golden Lineage. In the days of the past, a crown was warranted with strength. When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was robbed of his grace, becoming tarnished, he took with him his kinfolk and left the lands between. After the long march of the Tarnished came to an end, Godfrey divested himself of his kingship, becoming a simple warrior once more. One of the possible reasons for Godfrey's departure is revealed in the item description for the Elden Lord armor set, which reads, Crown of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. The age of the Erd Tree began amongst conflict. When Godfrey was the lord of the battlefield, he led the war against the giants, faced the Storm Lord alone, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, and it was then, as the story is told, that the hue of Lord Godfrey's eyes faded. This is further developed by the echoes of Marika in the Third Church of Marika and the Church of Pilgrimage, respectively. My Lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death, warriors of my Lord, Lord Godfrey. Considering the Kaiden sellsword's role as a hired militia, this corresponds with Godfrey's relationship with Marika. His services became unnecessary after eliminating all threats to the Erd Tree and Marika's reign. To briefly summarize what has been covered so far, Godfrey served as Elden Lord until defeating the last opposition to Marika's reign. Subsequently divested of grace, he and the Tarnished began the Long March. Most, if not all, departed from the lands between by boat, as detailed by the rusted anchor. A rusty anchor wielded as a weapon. While the Tarnished left the lands between with their lord, one boat was said to have been left behind. However, this is not all that the axe talisman reveals to us. In fact, the appellative axe is a weapon we can acquire, and the last piece of the puzzle. Found in Stormvale Castle, under a large painting of Godfrey, we find the Highland axe on a smouldering corpse. Side by side, we can clearly see the axes both feature the same design: interlocking lines along the axe blade, an 8-pointed star where the blade is mounted to the handle, and a braid design on the handle itself. The Highland axe reads, Single-sided axe used by warriors of the Highlands. Brave combatants begin battle by crying out their names.
Now I fight as Hoaralou. Warrior!
The Highland axe is also almost identical to the Great Axe, the blades and handles matching almost exactly in shape. The Great Axe also features a small braided design on the axe shaft just under the blade. The Great Axe tells us, Great Axe akin to a huge lump of iron, recognized as the weapon of choice by Badland chieftains. Too heavy to be wielded by those of merely ordinary strength, blows from this axe will flatten enemies, and the force of its charged attacks is a sight to behold. We are told during the opening cinematic that prior to returning to the lands between, Hoaralou was known as the chieftain of the Badlands. And of course there is Nefeli Lu, revered champion of the Badlands, her armor further describing what became of Godfrey and the warriors that stayed by him after exile. The champion's pauldron states, Pauldron reserved for the Badlands' bravest, proof the wearer has slaughtered countless foes. Following the example of their chieftain, Hoaralou, the brave warriors of the Badlands shun excess adornment. That is everything found within the game prior to the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, so let's summarize the theory thus far. Hoaraloo, warrior, the chieftain of the Northerners, the Kaiden, is recruited by Marika and takes upon himself the mantle of Lord. During his reign as Lord, Godfrey vanquishes any and all who stand to oppose the domination of the Erdtree. Once Marika's reign was secured, Godfrey was divested of his lordship and grace, exiled from the Lands Between, and returned to his humble roots as a warrior in the Badlands. While the crown of Godfrey does imply a correlation between Godfrey's role as a conqueror expiring and his departure and loss of grace, I believe there to be another reason, that being his willingness to face death. Godfrey rose to lordship by defeating and subjugating those who ruled prior. It seems as though he expected for his own reign to end similarly. To quote the acts of Godfrey and his own dying words respectively, "In the days of the past, a crown was warranted with strength. Brave tarnished, thy strength befits a crown." We also know that during Godfrey's reign, ritual combat was celebrated across the Lands Between, the sanctification of the struggle of survival and the honor of death, as stated by the ritual shield talisman and the red-feathered branch sword respectively. A talisman patterned after shields used in ritual combat held to honor the Erdtree. The practice had died out by the age of King Consort Radagon, but remains of the arenas where ritual combat took place can still be found in every land. A talisman adorned with red feathers, once used in ancient death rituals. The heart sings when one draws close to death, and a glorious end awaits those who cling so tenaciously to life. While we haven't delved into the relationship between Godfrey and his age and the ancient death rites carried out by the Deathbirds, I do believe these things are directly related. I plan on going more in depth on this in the future, but for now, I will just briefly cite the abundance of bygone death practices found at Stormvale Castle. I believe it was this willingness to face and embrace death that caused Marika to drive Godfrey from the Lands Between. After all, Marika's Golden Order was founded upon the removal and sealing of the Rune of Death, as stated by finger reader Enya. The Rune of Death goes by two names. The other is Destined Death, the forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation. To Godfrey, it's not about the last name or family legacy, it's about who is best qualified. We live by the law of the jungle, and the lion who rules this kingdom wouldn't have it any other way. Godfrey earned his place at the top through his might, and would only concede his power through another's might. Understanding this, it makes sense that Queen Marika, the Eternal, would not allow her order to be led by Godfrey, a lord who would welcome and embrace death. What was the Cut Brave set did eventually find its way into the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, as the Highland Warriors set. There are two variations of the head and chest pieces for this set, and they are all found near the grounds of the Great Red Bears, Ralva and Rugalia. The Great Red Bears and Rune Bears are a subject that I will explore more thoroughly in the future, but for the time being, all that is important is that they are touched by the Crucible, a sign of divinity. The Highland Warrior set states across its pieces, headband worn by Highland Warriors, made of woven leather. The white favour represents their home settlement. Highland Warriors are known to be hunters of bears. To them, there is no act more glorious than the subjugation of a savage beast. Red patterned fabrics were allowed only to those who hunted bears, the greatest and most glorious of the Highlanders. The significance of the red patterned fabric is important, but will be addressed in future content. For now, what is important is how this directly relates to Godfrey, namely, the high regard of the subjugation of beasts, something that seems extremely likely Godfrey himself has done with Sarosh, the Lord of Beasts, who later became Godfrey's regent. for what beast would be a higher prize than the Lord of all beasts? Given the beast's presence in Farum Azula, and the presence of what seems to be an archaic Elden rune, I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that Marika and Godfrey's acquisition of the Elden rune and Sorosh's subjugation coincide. At the very least, these are two instances of Marika and Godfrey claiming core aspects of Farum Azula for their own. Delving into deeper speculation, I believe this may also parallel the Divine Bird Warriors, who are found in Enya Ilim and the ancient ruins of Ra. The Divine Bird Warriors explicitly revere the Crucible, as does Godfrey, the leader of the Crucible Knights. Divine Bird Warrior Ornus's ashes read, Divine Bird Warrior from whom the Horned Warriors claim descent, clad in golden armor, and granted wings and feathers by divine invocation. Ornus succeeded in taming the divine bird, and made its wings his own as he soared through the sky. When he finally fell to earth, he lived on as the guardian deity of the temple quarter. Without going into unnecessary detail, I believe the divine bird was likely very similar to other ancient mighty beasts, such as Sorosh, the great red bears, and the horned beings in the specimen storehouse. It seems as though these divine beasts were preyed upon in a form of ritualistic hunting, much like the ritualistic combat of the Age of Godfrey and his Colosseums. The horn-strewn excrement states, excrement of a large carnivorous beast, containing fragments of horns, material used for crafting items, found underfoot in places like forests where beasts dwell. It is said that the deadliest of the horned predators enjoy the sport of hunting and devouring other horned creatures. While Ornus and Godfrey don't literally devour the beasts they've subjugated, I believe this is ultimately more or less the same thing. They defeat mighty beasts with the intent of claiming their power for their own, a display of their strength and right to rule. For if one is fit to rule the mightiest of beasts, surely one is fit to rule over all beneath them. After all, that is simply how these games work. To defeat someone is to take in their strength, and their very essence. As stated by the ancestral spirit horn, thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. I'd also briefly like to dive into another point of speculation. As discussed earlier, it seems entirely possible that the home settlement of Kaiden was located somewhere in the Forbidden Lands. Interestingly enough, another race of tall, curved sword-wielding warriors can be found in the wintry north, the Zamor. Very little is known about these knights. What we do know is they are the ancient enemies of the fire giants, and were even hailed as heroes during the war led by Godfrey. They live in very close proximity to Stormhawks, which are only otherwise found in Stormvale, Farum Azula, and Castle Sol, and they utilize storm magic. Godfrey himself, of course, led the war against the fire giants. Stormhawks are the ancient crest of Stormvale, and can still be found in the castle today, and the connections between Godfrey and the storm are almost countless. At the very least, their reputation as war heroes is evidence that Godfrey and the Zamor fought alongside each other. To take this point even further, the Horned Warriors, Divine Beast Warriors, and Divine Bird Warriors are mostly found in the northern half of the Shadow Realm, namely Belurat, Enya Ilim, and the ruins of Ra. One line of reasoning could be that this is the evolution of a single people, or the evolution of a culture as it is passed down or usurped by different peoples. To explore one final point, Godfrey, being a blue-clad warrior and conqueror of divine beasts, seems to echo another character's story from the vanilla, the Blind Swordsman, an ancient mighty warrior dressed in blue with ashen white hair who gained renown for sealing away a divine beast of their own. Interestingly enough, most of the equipment related to the Blind Swordsman can be found in Limgrave, Stormvale Castle, and the consecrated Snowfield, all areas we've established as having strong ties with Godfrey's clan. It seems reasonable to assume that the Blind Swordsman may have been Kaiden as well. To summarize, in the past, Hoaraloo, mighty Kaiden Highlander joined forces with Marika, becoming her lord, Godfrey. He fought as a warlord on her behalf during her conquest of the Lands Between. After accomplishing their goals, Godfrey was stripped of his grace and title, exiled from the Lands Between, and assumed his former role of a humble barbarian, before eventually journeying back to reclaim his title. There is much more I'd like to discuss. However, for the sake of brevity, these are things that will be addressed in the future. If you have any questions or input, please feel free to discuss in the comments, and I will do my best to address everything. Thank you very much for watching.